So I don't know whether I've succeeded in sharing with you some thoughts about why it is that 17-year-old females might well be concerned with feeling too fat and wanting to regulate their lives through dieting, and through reducing that fatness feeling more in charge, more competent, owning their bodies more. And the reality is that, as I've said, 70%, epidemiological studies which we did 20 years ago, which we've repeated in the last couple of years, which have been done in Scandinavia, done in North America, and I think you'd find the same thing in the third world. But of course that 70% of adolescent females doesn't develop anorexia nervosa. 1% of them might. Most of them will struggle to lose weight unsuccessfully. And in fact, dietary restraint of an excessive kind only breeds the impulse to eat more. And that will be an exaggeration of the thing I was talking about. 500 calories one day and 4,200 the next, and so on. So, what is the thing that leads to the spilling out of anorexia nervosa from that substrate? Well, now, if I have time to flash through some of these slides, I will still show you an epidemiological study that, as I was saying, we did 20 years ago, which showed that those 70% of girls actually weighed, as an average, between 8.5 and 9 stones. That was what they weighed. And what they actually wanted to be, if you asked them, and we did, what weight would you like to be? You feel too fat. What weight would you like to be? The answer was 7 stones. 70% of teenage females in 1972, in the population we surveyed, weighed nearly 9 stones and wanted to be 7, but couldn't make it. Now, if you take an anorectic population, and they will be weighing on average about 6 stones, and ask them what's the maximum weight they could tolerate being, the answer will also be 7 stones. So the only difference between the 70% of teenage females and the anorectic population is that whereas the teenage females can't get below 7 stones, the anorectic population is below 7 stones and has become, and it's done that through successful, in their own terms, calorie restriction, and of course increased activity and so on. So they've got down to 7 stones and then below it, and now they're terrified of getting above 7 stones. And one of the pathognomonic features of anorexia nervosa is a fear. I mean, this thing varies a bit according to height, obviously. The pathognomonic feature really is a fear of being more than 7 stones. So an anorectic will tell you, or they might if you have their trust, I'm terrified of getting fat. When you ask them what that means, it means being more than 7 stones. Now, other studies will show that actually about 7 stones is about the prompt for pubertal development. It's the threshold beneath which puberty is quiescent. That's not the same as the menarche. I mean, if you take 100 anorectics, you'll find that of the females, that's 15% have primary amenorrhea. They've never menstruated. The others have secondary amenorrhea. So then people say, I've got 15% of my population is anorexia nervosa occurring in a child. Now that's a very naive notion, obviously, that because it's premenarchal, that it's occurring in a child, because the puberty is a 3 to 4 year long process, and the menarche is a late event in puberty. I mean, the average age of the menarche is about 12.5 years, with a lot of variation. And puberty has been entrained, on average, 2.5 years before the menarche, which means that on average puberty starts at about 10, and it can start at 9 or even 8. Those processes. And anorexia nervosa can spill out of the first experience of those changes when a growing female first begins to feel the stirrings of change, and that she's losing control of herself, and that something is being changed which may reflect a point of no return, and which may be something which she can't cope with. So, to move on to the question of the natural history of anorexia nervosa, it erupts almost invariably in adolescence, but you can have later onset for the reasons I was hinting at. And it always arises within the context of calorie constraint because of feeling too fat. And to try to argue as to why 1%, if you like, of all of those who are trying to lose weight develop anorexia nervosa, I would say that first of all, anorexia nervosa provides a solution to what would be otherwise overwhelming developmental problems, to do in the very broadest sense with the effects of growth and development and the challenge that they present in adolescence. And that is the rewarding thing that makes calorie restraint suddenly easy, because it has solved a problem, and it can happen within a matter of weeks, because it has not only stifled but reversed the processes of development. Anorexia nervosa is a back-to-the-walls solution. The anorectic has nowhere else to go, which is why they defend their position so vigorously, and why suicide is one of the commonest causes of death, even in the more acute phases of the illness, if the thing is injudiciously disturbed. But many girls would deal with that problem, if you like, with agoraphobia. I mean, a headmaster friend of mine tells me that, he reckons that about nearly 50% of his 14 and 15-year-old girls are agoraphobic. And they conceal that by working at home every night and not going out, and that's why they get such good O-levels. I mean, I've done studies in university students, and the ones who get the first-class degrees are the ones who are socially phobic. You see? So, but that's quite a mature, if you like. I mean, it's a neurotic adjustment, if you like, which has a sort of very positive spin-off, but it's not available to the person who develops anorexia nervosa. It's a very primitive defense, if you like, because although it is such a magical defense in reversing the whole developmental thrust, it is, of course, one which has got limited mileage, because the individual has now derailed from development. And as the years go by, very quickly they are isolated. Their peers struggle on, find some solution to life, develop relationships, and grow away. The anorectic is now locked biologically at an age of, let's say, 8. You see, she develops her anorexia at 15, and she's now regressed, not in a psychological or symbolic or isolated sense, but in a truly physical sense. So what are the kinds of problems that this condition has now solved? What are those maturational problems? Let's take Lucy. Now, Lucy comes to you, let's say she comes to you at the age of 16, and you hadn't seen her for a year or two, although you know, looking back, that you did worry a bit about her because she seemed to have lost her periods for a while, but then you lost sight of her, and she now comes to you at 16, and she's quite clearly anorectic, and she's had anorexia nervosa for 2 years since she was 14. Now, the first problem you're going to have in identifying the maturational problem is that, first of all, now it's no longer there. It's the one thing that has been solved by the anorexia nervosa. There's now a massive problem in this family of a starving child, which itself is something that totally de-skills parents. So the parents now come to you de-skilled with a history of conflict over the last 2 years in which they've singularly failed to enable their daughter to eat, and which they can't understand, and about which they feel helpless and hopeless. And if you're not careful, you'll focus on that. But that is a universal characteristic of any of us, I would guess, who had such a situation, and it is secondary to the anorexia nervosa. Now, the maturational problem, as I've said, is now no longer there, and may never have been articulated. Because I'm suggesting to you that anorexia nervosa is a conflict avoidance response. There was conflict, the anorexia nervosa has solved it by avoidance of the developmental thrust. And if there's one thing that characterises anorectic families, it is conflict avoidance mechanisms. And one of the classical conflict avoidance mechanisms is non-communication. One of the great solutions to avoiding conflict, not to communicate.